The phone call lasted 47 minutes. The Chinese president and the Iranian supreme leader spoke directly, not through intermediaries, not through back channels, in what officials in Beijing are already describing as a conversation about strategic partnership in the face of common external threats. And when it was over, China's foreign ministry issued a statement that has sent shockwaves through American foreign policy circles. China will stand with Iran. Economically, diplomatically, and in ways that the statement described with deliberate vagueness as all necessary means of support. In Washington, the reaction was swift and alarmed. American officials privately acknowledge what public statements have been careful not to say outright. The United States now faces a situation it has long feared and spent decades trying to prevent. A formal alignment between China and Iran that transforms what was already a dangerous regional conflict into something with genuinely global dimensions. Let's unpack what this means, because there's a lot of noise around this story and very little signal. The media wants to tell you this is either World War III beginning or just a routine diplomatic statement with no real teeth. Neither is true. The reality is more complicated, more consequential, and more immediately important than either of those framings suggests. First, let's be precise about what China has actually committed to, because the statement from Beijing is deliberately crafted to be interpreted multiple ways. What China has explicitly committed to includes continued oil purchases from Iran at dramatically increased volumes, acceleration of the 25-year Comprehensive Cooperation Agreement that China and Iran signed in 2021, provision of additional civilian and dual-use technology, and diplomatic backing at the United Nations, including use of veto power in the Security Council to block any resolution that would formally sanction or condemn Iran for its actions in the current conflict. What China has not explicitly committed to is direct military intervention, provision of weapon systems to Iran that could be used in the current conflict, or publicly endorsing Iran's specific military actions. That gap between what China has committed to and what it hasn't is where the most important analytical work needs to happen. The economic dimension alone is significant. Iran needs hard currency. Iran needs buyers for its oil. Iran needs technology for its industrial and military sectors. China provides all three. The sanctions regime that America has built around Iran is designed to strangle the Iranian economy. China's backing effectively creates a major hole in that regime, a hole big enough that Iran's leadership can feel confident it will not be economically strangled into submission, regardless of what America and its allies do. To understand the depth of China's commitment to Iran, you need to understand the 25-year Comprehensive Cooperation Agreement, because it is far more significant than Western media has generally reported. The deal, signed in 2021, covers 5 broad areas. The first is energy. China commits to investing in Iran's oil and gas sector in exchange for guaranteed oil supplies at preferential rates over the 25-year period. The scale of investment being discussed is enormous. Estimates range from $200 to $400 billion over the life of the agreement. This turns Iran's oil wealth into a Chinese guaranteed revenue stream that no amount of American sanctions can fully interrupt as long as China is willing to keep buying. The second area is infrastructure. China's Belt and Road Initiative has Iranian components, rail links connecting Iran to China through Central Asia, port development that would give China strategic access to the Persian Gulf and eventually the Indian Ocean, and telecommunications infrastructure that would modernize Iranian communications and potentially provide significantly enhanced security capabilities. The third area is military cooperation. This is the most sensitive and the least publicly detailed part of the agreement. What is known includes joint naval exercises, cooperation on military technology, and intelligence sharing arrangements that give Iran access to Chinese satellite imagery and monitoring capabilities. Some analysts believe the military cooperation components are significantly deeper than what has been publicly disclosed. The fourth area is financial. China and Iran have been systematically building a financial relationship that bypasses the US dollar-based international financial system. Transactions in yuan, barter arrangements, and financial mechanisms that allow Iran to receive payment for oil and goods without going through SWIFT, the international financial messaging system that American sanctions depend on. The fifth area is technology. China is Iran's primary source of advanced civilian technology, and much civilian technology has dual-use military applications. Semiconductors, telecommunications equipment, industrial machinery, chemical processing technology. All of it flows from China to Iran in quantities that have been increasing year over year. China doesn't make major foreign policy moves without careful calculation. Understanding why Beijing decided to go public with its support for Iran at this particular moment tells you a great deal about how China sees the global strategic situation. The first reason is Taiwan. China's leadership has been watching American military and political attention carefully for years, trying to identify the moment when America is most distracted, most extended, and least capable of responding to a Chinese move in Taiwan. A major American military engagement in the Middle East, particularly one that involves conflict with Iran and potentially Iranian proxies across the region, would consume American naval, air, and ground assets in ways that would significantly reduce American capacity to respond to a Taiwan contingency. China's backing for Iran isn't just about Iran, it's about Taiwan. It's about creating the conditions in which a Chinese move against Taiwan faces a degraded American response. The second reason is the dollar. China has spent years trying to reduce the international financial system's dependence on the US dollar, which China correctly sees as a tool of American geopolitical power. Every time China and Iran transact in yuan rather than dollars, every time they build financial infrastructure that bypasses SWIFT, they're chipping away at the dollar's global role. The third reason is energy security. China imports roughly 10 million barrels of oil per day, and roughly 40% of that comes from the Middle East. Of that, a significant and growing portion comes from Iran, where China gets preferential pricing because Iran's other customers are limited by sanctions. The fourth reason is American credibility. China's strategic goal in the Pacific is to demonstrate to countries like Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Australia that American security guarantees are not reliable enough to stake their futures on. Every time America gets bogged down in a Middle Eastern conflict, China's argument gets a little stronger. The Trump administration is facing a situation that no American president has faced in the modern era: a direct confrontation with a major regional power backed explicitly by the world's second-largest economy and military power. Previous American strategy against Iran relied heavily on economic pressure, sanctions that worked because of America's ability to cut Iran off from the global financial system, and because most countries, even those sympathetic to Iran, were unwilling to sacrifice their own economic relationships with America to support Tehran. China's backing changes both of those conditions. What can America do? There is the option of economic escalation against China, threatening secondary sanctions on Chinese companies and banks that do business with Iran. This is actually something America has done to a limited degree before, but the scale of the Chinese-Iranian economic relationship that now exists makes this extraordinarily difficult. Sanctioning Chinese companies that deal with Iran means potentially sanctioning huge chunks of Chinese industrial capacity that is intertwined with global supply chains. The economic self-harm to America and its allies from such sanctions could be severe. Direct military confrontation with China is obviously not a real option. Nobody in Washington is seriously discussing military conflict with China over Iran. Diplomatic engagement, trying to convince China that its support for Iran is destabilizing in ways that ultimately harm Chinese interests too, is theoretically appealing but practically limited. Diplomacy is most effective when you can offer something the other side wants that you're currently withholding. What does America have to offer China that China wants more than it wants the strategic benefits of backing Iran? The Trump administration, based on everything we know about how it operates, will almost certainly combine economic pressure on Chinese entities that support Iran with military pressure on Iran itself. The question is whether that combination is sufficient to change the strategic calculus. We can't discuss China backing Iran without noting the third actor in this equation: Russia. Russia, China, and Iran have been moving towards something that looks increasingly like a strategic alignment for several years. Joint naval exercises in the Indian Ocean, trilateral diplomatic consultations, a shared interest in reducing American global influence, and a common experience of being the targets of American sanctions pressure. None of them are formal allies in the way NATO members are allies, but they share enough interests and interact enough operationally that the effect is similar. Russia's primary contribution to this alignment is military. Russia has provided Iran with advanced air defense systems. Russia and Iran have cooperated on drone technology. Iran provided Russia with Shahed drones for use in Ukraine, and Russia has provided Iran with knowledge and assistance in return. The combination of Russian military support, Chinese economic support, and the IRGC's own extensive military and intelligence capabilities creates a challenge for America that is qualitatively different from what it faced when dealing with Iran alone. American military planners have wargamed this scenario. The conclusion of most of those wargames is sobering. America can defeat Iran militarily, but doing so in a context where China is providing economic support and Russia is providing military technology and diplomatic cover is significantly more costly and takes significantly longer than dealing with Iran in isolation. America's allies are now facing a genuinely difficult choice, and some of them are starting to say so publicly. The European allies, Germany, France, the UK, are caught between their commitment to the American alliance system and their economic interdependence with China. European companies have significant exposure to Chinese markets. The prospect of being drawn into economic conflict with China through secondary sanctions or by having to choose sides in a US-China confrontation over Iran is deeply alarming to European governments. The Asian allies, Japan, South Korea, Australia, are in some ways even more exposed. These countries face direct Chinese military pressure in their own neighborhoods. They have been increasingly dependent on American security guarantees, but they also have extensive economic ties with China. The prospect of a world in which China and America are in direct economic and strategic confrontation, with no clear victory in sight, is one that these countries are ill-equipped to navigate. What many American allies privately fear is a prolonged, grinding conflict in the Middle East that absorbs American attention and resources, while China uses the opportunity to solidify its position in the Pacific and expand its economic influence globally. Not a sudden catastrophic war, but a slow erosion of American power and credibility that over 5 to 10 years fundamentally changes the global order. That's not a paranoid scenario. That's a scenario that serious analysts in multiple allied capitals are now actively planning for. The announcement of Chinese backing for Iran has hit financial markets in ways that are worth tracking carefully. Oil prices are up significantly. The mechanism is obvious. If China is backing Iran, the probability of a coordinated international response that successfully pressures Iran is lower, meaning the conflict is likely to be more prolonged, and a prolonged conflict in the Persian Gulf region is a prolonged threat to oil supply routes. Gold is trading at historic levels, signaling that investors are seeking refuge from a system that feels fundamentally unstable. Defense stocks are surging. Bond markets are showing something important. The spread between American Treasury yields and yields on sovereign debt from major oil-importing emerging market economies is widening, one of the early indicators of the international financial contagion that could develop if the oil price shock is sustained. Currency markets show the classic safe haven dynamics. The dollar is strong, the yen is strong, the Swiss franc is strong, while currencies of major oil-importing emerging market economies are under significant pressure. Weaker currencies make imported oil more expensive in local terms, compounding the inflationary effect of the global oil price rise. China backing Iran is not just a diplomatic statement. It is a structural change in the global strategic environment that makes the current conflict significantly more dangerous, more prolonged, and more consequential than it would have been without Chinese involvement. America is not powerless in this situation. American military capability remains extraordinary. American economic capacity is immense. American alliance networks, while under strain, remain functional. But America now faces a challenge that requires a quality and sophistication of strategy that recent American foreign policy has not always demonstrated. The coming weeks will test American leadership, American alliances, and American strategic culture in ways that have no recent precedent. Whether America rises to that test, and what rising to the test even looks like in this complex situation, is the central question of the current moment. We'll keep watching and keep reporting as this situation develops, because this story is not going to resolve quickly, and the way it resolves will shape the world for a generation.